Welcome back for the second part of my Moglyph effects overview. I'm going to show you mainly what the second animate tab of the UI panel stands for. But before that, I have to mention a few things before starting. Since I've recorded the first part of the tutorial a long time ago, and since this moment I have changed a few things in the script, so I will show you now so that you will have all the latest informations. So the first thing that I want to show you is that when you work with the manual mode in the glyph cloning, in the first part I told you that you had to add manually an expression in the count, and you had to select the glyph and to remove them manually. Now, with the new version of my script, you won't have to bother with all this nerd stuff. So I want to show you it. So I will create a new composition. I will click on, let's say, basic geometry. This is the first step. As a reminder, just choose your wanted font. I will stay with the basic geometry. I will click on the radial cloner, for instance. Okay, here we go. I can go again in the count, for instance. And this is how it works when you are in procedural. Okay, so when you are in procedural, if I click on add a new glyph, I can now click on let's say this one and this one, and there is a nice alternate glyph that will cycle between your glyph 1 and glyph 2. So it's pretty cool, but it's with the procedural way that works like this. So now let's take a look at what happened when you select manual before clicking on the cloner. So I will remove it. This time I will click on manual and I will redo it just by clicking this button. And now, as you can see, there is a little message that is popping up. I will just click OK for now. Be sure to read it entirely before starting. So here I click on OK, and as you can see, now you end up with a cloner that is really empty. There isn't any glyph in it. And before, in the first part, when I've shown you in the first part, there was some glyph that you had to select manually and to delete manually. So now you don't have to bother with it. So now all you have to do is to click on your cloner and go inside your add new glyph button like this, and all you have to do is to click on your desired glyph in the order of your choice. So for now, in the example, I will click on this one. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, for instance. And if I close the panel, as you can see, now in the Moglyph cloner effect in the object, the count has now an expression to it that you don't even have to write yourself. As you can see, the script has done it for you. So as you can see, it's synced with the number of clones you add manually. So there is 10 here. So this is cool. This is a nice addition. It's way better and way easier to work with the manual mode now. So it's pretty cool. And there are another thing that I wanted to show you, and which is specific to the radial cloner. So let me show you what I want to show you here. So I will we choose the procedural way for this. I click on the cloner radial. Okay, I will just play with the count for now. This is totally procedural for now. And if you drill down the transform group from the radial cloner, you will see a bunch of properties that you can tweak, for instance, the position X, which is rotating the glyph around the circle, but you can scale on X and scale on Y your glyph separately. And this is true for other cloners too, but for the radial cloner, there is a little difference here. As you can see in the scale X, there is a little information in that shows you a plus car panel. It tells you that if you want to decrease the size of your glyphs, as you can see, if I type for instance 50%, as you can see, the glyph clones don't remain on the circle, so it shouldn't do this. And what it says here is, and this is true only for the radial cloner, if you want to scale on the X, you have to have this value in sync with the value in the character panel. So I've typed it, so I will type 50 here, okay? And as you can see now, the size is correct as well as the placement. So this is cool, and you really have to know it. Again, this is specific to the radial cloner. The other ones doesn't have to play with the character panel. So again, you can do Y scale as well, and you play. This is how you increase or decrease the value and the size of your clones inside a radial cloner. So this is it for now. I will now go ahead and dive in the real topic of this part 2, which is the second animate tab. So let's click on it. As you can see, the animate tab offers you 6 different effectors. The effectors, if you already know Cinema 4D, are really powerful to animate and to transform your clones in various ways. I will show you one by one in a few minutes. So to demonstrate them, I will create a bunch of cloners, really simple ones, sorry. So I will click, for example, on the grid cloner with the basic geometry. It's perfect. So I will click on the grid, I will drill down the object, choose a few less glyph, let's say this for instance. Okay, perfect. I can click now, so you have, if you want to add an effector to a cloner, you of course have to click on your cloner before, and now you can click on the effector to apply it. So let's start with the simplest one, sorry. It's called the plane effector, and it's exactly the same than in Cinema 4D if you already know it. If you don't know it, I can try to explain it a bit. It's really basic and simple. This is why it's called plane. And as a reminder, you can still click on any button of the UI while holding the Alt key. So if I press the Option key on my keyboard and click on the plane, for instance, you'll see this nice message that will pop up, and that tries to explain what each effector does. So basically, the plane effector will affect all your clones at the same time with the same value, the value that will be defined in the plane effector settings, in the parameters, and you will be able to play with some file of option. So this is really similar to the Cinema 4D workflow, and as long as you understand fully the concept behind the plane effector, it will become really easy for you to dive in the other effectors, since they are all based on the same principles. So let's start with the plane. So I click on my cloner, I click on the plane effector, and as you can see, instantly it have transformed all my clones at the same time. So as you can see, by default, without the effector applied, the only effect that you will find on your cloners, whichever setup it is the Moglyph cloner. Okay, if you add some different glyph with the add new glyph button, you can still do it after that. So let's do it. I can click on that, click on add new glyph, and I can still choose some different shapes. So let's say a circle and a nice cross, for instance. Perfect. And as you can see, the glyph effects that allows you to change the shape of your glyph, of each glyph, as I've shown you in the first part, are above the Moglyph cloner. Okay, so by default, without any effector created with this tab here, you will only add the Moglyph cloner plus the eventual glyph effects. But as soon as you click on one of the effectors, you will see your effectors here in the effects panel. So the first one that I've created is a plane effector, so it's called effector plane. Okay, and as you can see, by default, it rise up a bit your clones all at the same time with a Y position, okay, towards the top, and it colorizes all your clones in red. Okay, so this is due to the parameters. As you can see, the structure is exactly the same than in Cinema 4D, and this is true for any effectors. So if you open up a Cinema 4D project with Mograph, or if you create a new effector in Mograph, you will find the effector tab, the parameters tab, and the fall-off tab in your effectors. So I've tried my best to reproduce the same hierarchy, which is really convenient to help you dive in my toolset really easier, really faster. Okay, so why it rise up like this and why it colorize like this? This is because the effector by default is a plane effector. There are only one option available in the effector because this is a plain one. This is a more simple, the simpler effector, but you will see in a few minutes that the other effectors have their own options here in the effector tab. So the only settings that you have here is of strength. So by default this is 100%. You can't go more than 100, but if you decrease this value, as you can see now, the glyphs return to their position. If you type 0, it's like if you had no plane effector at all. But you can go at minus 100 if you want to, and it will go at the opposite transformation, and it will even do the opposite colorization. Okay, so by default, in most of the cases, you will stay with the 100% in the strength, but you can still animate this to animate from one state to the other if you want to. So this is it for the effector in the plane. The most important part of the effector, and this is true for anyone, is the parameter tab. Okay, in the parameters, you will find the transform group, the style group, and the other group. If you see a vertical rising up toward the top, this is due to the transform group, where by default you have the position Y with minus 100 here. If you type 0 here, as you can see, your glyph stay in place. You can still play with the Y position like this. You can play with the X position, with the anchor point on X, Y. You can still play with the Z value. You will see a few 3D examples in a few minutes, so I won't show you that for now. You have the position Z as well, and you have the scale X, okay, and the scale Y. Okay, by default this is 0, so it means you don't add any scale to the scale defined in the transform of the Moglyph cloner, which is 100% by default. Okay, so as you can see, by default the plane effector does exactly the same transform properties and the same way than in the transform group of the Moglyph cloner. But the real power of the effectors doesn't come from the transform, the parameters, sorry, in the transform, but you can combine this with the powerful fall-off options. So this is different from Cinema 4D, since in Cinema 4D you will find really cool shapes like linear, radial, torus, some really geometric shapes, but with this Moglyph toolset it's just impossible. So I just created a fall-off version of a fall-off option to just animate from the beginning to the end. Okay, this is just a completion value to animate from 0 to 100. Okay, let's think of it like the start and end from, let's say, a trim path, for example. Okay, so if I let to 0 for the from and let to 100% for the to, you have all your clones from start to end that are affected by the parameters defined here in the transform. Okay, again I can raise them up a bit, and you can colorize them with a style. This is where you'll find in the style the fill color, fill opacity, stroke color, stroke opacity, fill and stroke hue, fill and stroke brightness, and stroke thickness if you have some thickness to add. Okay, so as you can see, if I play with the stroke thickness, I have added a thickness to the clones, which is pretty cool. Okay, and by default you have colors from cloner that is deactivated for the plane effector, but you can still click on that, and now what it's gonna do, it's gonna link the color of the fill color and the stroke color with the color defined in the fill color and the stroke color from the transform group of the Moglyph cloner, which is pretty cool and pretty convenient. Okay, so you can activate it or disable it if you want to. Okay, so I will zero it out. I will choose another color, for instance. Okay, a nice green. This is all for the style group. It's pretty easy to understand and pretty powerful. I've forgotten a few options in the transform. You have the anchor point on each axis, the position on x-axis, the scale on x-axis. You can skew the glyph as well, okay, with a maximum of 70 and a minimum of -70. Okay, and you can still play with a skew angle like this, which is pretty nice. Okay, it can be definitely useful in some cases. I will zero it out again. You have the rotation Z, because in 2D you have the rotation that corresponds to the rotation Z in 3D. Okay, and if you had a 3D layer, if you had, let's say, enabled the per character 3D, that we will do it in a few minutes, don't worry for that. You won't find any rotation X and rotation Y here. You'll have to drill down your effects and go add your property manually. So I will show you in a few minutes. So now if I play with the rotation Z, as you can see, the crosses turns and the circles turns as well, of course, but since it's a circle, you don't see the rotation. And you have the visibility. As you can see in the transform group, from the Moglyph cloner, the visibility can define the visibility of your clones, and in the effector plane, and in each effector as well, you have the ability in the transform to play with the visibility. Just keep in mind that the visibility is a slider from 0 to 100%. That is exactly the same than After Effects opacity. Okay, so by default it's 100% visible. If I do a 0, this is invisible. And of course you can have some semi-transparent one with values like this. Okay, so this is it for the transform, and we will end with the fall-off just in a few seconds, but I want to show you the other group as well, because there are a few really cool things that you can do with it. So in the other group, you can find a few options that are really cool. For instance, for example, you have the spacing option. By default, this is 0, but if you play with the spacing, you will space your clones whichever cloner type you have chosen. Okay, so it will allow you to space your glyph even if it's aligned on a spline, which is pretty cool and pretty powerful in some cases. You can play with the radial too, with the honeycomb, the linear, etc. So this is the spacing. You have the blur X, then the blur Y. So if I type, let's say, 40 in the X blur, you can see it blurry. It blurs out the glyph on X only, and you can do it on the Y as well. Okay, which is pretty cool. And you can modify the glyph. It's really cool, since if I want all my glyph, the circles and the crosses, to be overwritten by another shape from the glyph panel, I can do it. So by default, if I do not change the 0 from the modify glyph parameter, the shapes remain the same that I have defined here in the glyph 2 and glyph 1. Okay, but if I open up the add new glyph, okay, I don't click on anything, but if I go over a shape that I love, for example, so let's say I love this nice let's say this plus signs in a circle, for example. If I go over this shape, I can read glyph 68. Okay, this is its index, glyph 68. So now if I go in the modify glyph and I type 68, as you can see, all my glyph have become the exact same shape than this shape here. So this is in sync with the glyph panel. It's really cool. So I can close it up. Okay. This is it for the Moglyph, the modify glyph. Sorry, I will go to 0. So I retrieve my initial glyphs, and the offset glyphs allows you to offset each glyph independently. So the circle, if I open up the add new glyph panel, okay, so let's find the circle. So the circle is here, okay, and the cross is here. So if I play with the offset glyph, let's say I will add 2, for example, it means that, as you can see, the circles have been offset by 1, 2. So this is this one that have replaced the old one for all the circles. And for the cross, As you can see, the cross, I have offset it by 2, so cross 1, 2, and this is why I have this shape here, okay, that have replaced all my crosses. This is a pretty powerful way to change your different glyph shapes, so keep that in mind, it's really cool. And of course, if you just play with these options and just animate them like this, it won't be that interesting. But now, if I twirl down the fall of group, I can now play with the completion from and completion to and completion offset as well to animate them. So if I decrease the completion to, look at what happened. Okay, really cool. And now we can animate from one state defined here to the other with the effector plane. And this is how you animate with effectors in my toolset. Okay, and this is true for all the effectors here. So, okay, I will make a keyframe here, go a little further in the timeline, and I will animate it to 100%. And now if I press play, as you can see, all my clones have been animated one by one sequentially from the start to the end, okay, which is pretty nice. Okay, and you have some really interesting options. As you can see, you can invert the selection. So if I click on invert, as you can see, this is at the exact invert of the selection, which is pretty cool. Okay, so this is the invert option. You have the possibility to offset the completion. So if you do not want the first clone to be affected first, but if you want to start, let's say, here, at this cross here, you can definitely offset the completion with this slider, like this. Okay, so now if I play the animation, you have that. Okay, so you can offset it, and you can let's return to let's say 10%, 0%, and you can offset it like this to have a nice motion that will focus on only a portion of specific clones, which is pretty cool. Okay, so you can just play with the different sliders. They are all useful. Okay, and if I animate them, let's say like this, okay, you could definitely not want the smooth motion here, the smooth transition. So in certain cases, you will want to have a really more solid, not that smooth transition. So this is why I have added an option with the fall off here. By default, this is 100%. It means that it will interpolate between one state to the other with a smooth transition. But if you type in 0, you have now a way more solid transition, okay, like this. It can be useful in some cases, especially for FUI works, for instance. Okay, so keep that in mind. It's really important in some cases as well. So this is it for the effector plane, and just to let you know, you have in the animate tab some effector options here. Just to have it in mind, by default, these two options aren't enabled. And by default, if they aren't enabled, you will have this fall-off options. But if you had selected this option before clicking on the plane effector, you would have some different options here in the fall-off. So let me show you that now. You can add as many effectors as you need, as you want, okay, which is pretty cool. So I can keep this effector plane here. I will close this group, and I can add another plane effector. Okay, so before clicking on this second plane effector, I will check the randomize fall-off order here, just to show you these options. So now I have checked it, and now if I click play, as you can see, like before, all your clones are affected at the same time. They are turned in red, and they have raised up with towards the top. Sorry. Okay, so now if I drill down the fall-off options, you have one more option that is called randomize source, and it's just a number, a plain number here. And if you play with the completion sliders, let's say the completion 2, if I decrease it, let's see what happens. As you can see now, the order has been completely changed. Okay, so you do not have a transition from the first clone to the latest clone, okay, that was happening with the first effector. And now, since I had checked randomize fall-off order before clicking on the second plane effector, I can now have a transition that is way more organic, okay, and more random. This is why I've called it randomized fall-off order. And if you do not like the order of this transition, you can still click on the randomized source and just play with the value to automatically radically change the look of your transition. Okay? Hope it makes sense. Since I am here, I will show you how to remove properly an effector. And before that, as you can see, I have added two plane effectors, and there will appear here in the effects panel in the order of their creation, and they will increment with a number here as long as you create different copies of different copies of the same effector. Okay, so I could definitely add again a new effector and so on and so on. Okay, so plane effector plane 2, effector plane 3, etc. Okay, so let me show you now how to remove properly an effector. So to do this, you first have to drill down, not the effect, not go directly in the effect panel, but first you have to drill down the text group here. And as you can see, you have all the text group in sync with the effects panel. So you will find the glyph 1 and the glyph 1 here, the glyph 2 and the glyph 2 here. You will find the cloner transform, which consists of this transform group from the Moglyph cloner. Here it says that you have to do not touch to this group. It's really important to make the Moglyph cloner work properly. And you have the effector plane, which corresponds to this effect. You have the effector plane 2, which corresponds to this effect. And these three ones aren't some effects. It's really important to understand that. So if I drill down this effect, as you can see, this is where you'll find all the expressions that I have created for the tools. And basically, all you have to know about it, it's simply some different animators, native After Effects animators that I have set it up for you. Okay? So to properly remove your effectors, and this is the same for removing some glyph shapes as well, you have to first, let's say I want to move the plane 2 and plane 3 effectors, so I select both of them, and now I delete them. And if I have correctly deleted them here in the text group, now I can go in the effects panel and now I can delete them. Okay? If you do not do it in that exact order, you will have a lot of expressions errors. Okay? So this is how you remove correctly an effector. So if I want to remove one shape for my glyph, this is the exact same thing. So let's say I want to remove the glyph 2, which is for me this crosses here. So I can click on the glyph 2, for example. I will delete it here in the text group. This is really important. And now I can delete it in the glyph 2. Okay? So now I have only one unique glyph. Okay? Hope it makes sense and it's clear enough. So I really hope to. I will undo it a few times. So I will remove the effector plane. For the moment, I can let's say yes, there is one more thing that I didn't show you in the first part, so it's really important to know it. You will better understand how it works with the hierarchy here. So let's say you want to populate your clones with let's say some so I will redo it from scratch. So I will click on the grid again, but I will choose a way nicer font, let's say an iconic solid font, this one for example. I will click on the grid and I will open up the object group, type in 5 and 3 like before to have less glyphs. Be careful with too high value because you will slow down your machine. This is normal, okay? So I have by default with my cloner here the very first glyph of this font available, which is the heart shape in the iconic solid. So if I want, let's say, a star and a nice water drop, for example, okay, and let's say a nice leaf. Okay, this is pretty. I have the glyph 1, glyph 2, and glyph 3 that are here to help me set up the correct shape later, but I do not want to show you this now. You have already seen that. But what I wanted to show you is how I will colorize each shape independently. So let's say I want all my stars to be yellow. I want all my water drops to be blue and all my leaves to be green. So all you have to do is to deploy your cloner layer, to drill down the text group, okay, to go inside each glyph group like this, and you can so my glyph 3 is the latest glyph added, so it's my leaf. I can in my glyph 3 go in add, property, fill color, RGB, okay, and I can choose a nice green, for example. And why the hell don't you see the color for my leaves? This is just because of the order of this hierarchy. So if you want to colorize manually all your clones like this, you will have to move your cloner transform before the glyphs. This is really important because in the cloner transform, you have a fill color here, which overrides the one before. So if I put my cloner transform before the glyph groups, now I can see the nice green for my leaves. So let's do it for the second glyph, which is basically my water drop. I can go at the right here, go in Add, Property, Fill Color, RGB. Okay, and I can colorize it in a nice blue. And same for the glyph 1, I can go here, Add, Property, Fill Color, RGB, and fill them with a nice yellow. So now I have all my glyphs colorized for each shape, which is pretty cool. And what is really nice is that each cloner setup comes with a nice option here in the clones, in the object, to iterate them. So I have glyph 1, which is my star, glyph 1, glyph 2, my drop, glyph 3, my leaf, star, drop, leaf, star, drop, leaf, star, drop, leaf, etc. So this is because by default this is on iterate, but I can randomize them, which is pretty nice. So I can randomize them and play with the seed to randomize them as I want. Okay, so pretty nice, pretty cool. So I will go for the iterate. So again, if I just want my star and my drop, here is how to remove properly the leaves. So I deploy first my text group here. I find my unwanted glyph, which is my glyph 3 here. I delete it from here, and I can now delete my glyph 3 in my effects panel. Okay, pretty cool. So now if I click here and if I go to animate, I can click on plane, and why the hell my colors have been overridden by the plane effector? This is just because by default in the parameters the style is for the effector plane on fill color red. Okay, and even if I click on colors from cloner, what happens is it will go inside the transform Moglyph cloner and link your colors to these colors, which are basically the colors here. So even if the cloner transform is above the glyphs that we have colorized ourselves, you'll have to, if you do not want to touch to the color of your clones, you have to manually go inside your text group, in your effector plane, drill down your effector plane, and you'll have to manually delete the unwanted color properties. So if I just do not want to affect the yellow color of my star and the blue color of my drops, I just have in my effector plane group to select my fill and my stroke color if I play with a stroke color as well, and to delete them. And now, as you can see, my effector plane is applied. I can see this because here the group, this is how you activate and deactivate temporarily an effector here, just like the check sign in Cinema 4D, for example. This is in the text. If you click on the eye, it will enable or disable the effector temporarily, which is pretty cool. And as you can see, it works, and it is transformed by the transform position Y, and as again, this is just because of this -100 value, and I can zero it out and play, let's say, with the scale on X, scale on Y, and I can, let's say, turn them a bit, and you can play with, let's say, the style, and go over the fill brightness, for example. You can decrease the brightness to dark, to have a darker color, or you can do the invert, so you can increase the brightness of your color if you want to. Okay, I will choose a darker color here. I can play with the hue, okay, like this. This is pretty cool, and again, if you want to animate all this, all you have to do is to play with the fall off options. So again, you can play with this. Okay, and when I have created my plane effector, the randomized fall off order was checked. So this is why I have completely randomized transition here, and not the start from the start to the end transition. Okay, so if I want to start from end transition, I have to manually remove my effector here and here, and I have to uncheck the randomized fall off order and to click on the plane effector here. And now I can go in the completion, and now it animates them from start to end. And it can be definitely a nice way to colorize your older clone from one to the latest, okay, from the first one to the latest. So you can go to transform, zero the position Y out, and you can just let the style color as you want your clones. So now I can just play with, I could even add a stroke thickness like this, and add a nice pink like this, for example, and you can play with the completion, and as you can see, there is a nice transition from one to the latest, from one to the other. Okay, this is how you work with plane effectors and the other effectors as well. A latest thing that I want to show you in the effectors options is the rows based option here. This is why I have created a grid cloner. Just to remind, a few minutes before I created a grid cloner here. So this is basically a multi-line text layer. So since it's a multi-line, I can consider this line of glyphs like a row, this one like a second row, and this one like a third row. And of course, since it's a grid cloner, I can go in object and I can play with the gap on X and play with the gap on Y. So if I play with the gap on Y, I am spacing the different rows with this option here. So what is this rows-based option? So if I click on this rows-based option, I click on plane effector. Like before, it will rise up by default all your clones at the same time, and it will colorize all your clones as well. But if I play with the fall off option, the transition won't go from the first glyph to the latest glyph. It won't do an incremental, a sequential glyph by glyph transition, but it will do a line by line, a row by row transition. So let's do it. So if I click on this completion 2 here, so I have created a keyframe here at 100, and now I do a 0. Okay, and let's see what happened. As you can see, now all the glyphs in the same row I considered as a whole thing. Okay, so it can be definitely useful for the grid cloner and the honeycomb cloner. Of course, these options, this rows-based option doesn't concern the spline, the linear, and the radial cloner. Okay, hope it makes sense. And of course, you can randomize and have a row base. So let me show you that. I will delete it. I will create a nice grid from scratch like this. I have way more clones here. So now if I click on this, I can go to animate. I will enable the rows based and enable the randomized fall off order and click on plane. And now if I play with the fall off, I have a transition from one row to the other, but in a randomized order, which is pretty cool too. Okay, it's pretty cool. Just keep in mind that you can definitely turn your layer with the rotation. If you turn it by 90 degree or minus 90 degree, you can do with this a nice horizontal transitions. Okay, it's a bit like if you had chosen a linear fall off in Cinema 4D. Okay, pretty cool. I really hope that you have fully understood the power and the principles behind the blend effectors, because all I have shown for the fall off and the parameters here is exactly the same for all the other effectors.